This session is about running Solihull parenting groups via a virtual delivery, which of course a year ago I would imagine most of us wouldn't have even entertained the idea, but now it's becoming increasingly more common, and we are starting to be able to gather quite a lot of information about the different components that people think about when they are running the groups, and things that seem to be working and other things that you need to give some additional thought to. So I'm going to share my screen because I do have a short presentation. So I thought I'd start by sort of following up on what we've discovered about how to run a Solihull Approach parenting group via a digital platform in relation to Solihull groups. And the first thing we discovered is that the Solihull Approach model remains as critical to the delivery of both the content and the process of the group as it ever did. It's still all about relationships, and the experience so far is showing that it is as meaningful for parents and facilitators attending the group as it ever was. Of course, there are some parents and some facilitators where the experience still needs to be sort of tweaked and fine-tuned, but the overall impression is that it is a medium that is helpful to be able to deliver the group. We've thought about it and we've realised that keeping that parallel process in mind to support you as a facilitator and the parent is very, very useful. It allows you to avoid introducing changes to the virtual format that might detract from the experiential nature of the group. We've just found that when you're thinking about delivering in this medium, it's helpful to be cautious not to turn the delivery method into a presentation just because it's a virtual environment. We've also found that there are some practical confidentiality and safeguarding issues that practitioners need to consider in the virtual environment, and I'll mention those a little bit more in a minute. The type of digital platform, and when I refer to that, I mean either Zoom or Teams or WebEx, really varies with the organisation. In terms of delivery for practitioners, working with parents, the Teams seems to be more popular than the Zoom, but the Zoom at the moment has some more user-friendly features. So there's a sort of swings and roundabout element to it. For the sessions in the groups, that we've kept the original content and the timings, and overall it hasn't been necessary to split the sessions to create more sessions. I think that's because they're only 2 hours anyway, and also with the extra tweaks that have been put in, it's helped them to continue to run reasonably smoothly. And I mentioned that in relation to the short look away, what people have done is they've added in additional look aways to the normal break, and that might well be a minute, or it might be 5 minutes, allows people to get up, get a drink, look after their eye care, looking away from the screen. Now, a lot of this might be very familiar to it, so I do apologise if you've already thought about this. One of the other things that we found is that if people are taking breaks, it's better not to disconnect from the session, but to rather to disconnect your camera and mute, because it reduces the risk of you not being able to get back in again. And also it's been an interesting observation that sometimes people have had to request that parents don't engage in some behaviours such as drinking or vaping could be suggested in the breaks rather than the sessions. And I think this is where people feel more comfortable in their home environment, and that's different to them being in a room, in a sort of clinic setting. People still need to think about the use of mobile phones and answering texts, and some have said that they've had to pay even more attention to it than in the face-to-face delivery. And again, that may well be because it's the parent is in their home environment. People have also asked about the camera. Should it be activated? Should you request that people have it on? And the general decision and opinion on that is that cameras should be activated. Some parents do feel uncomfortable at first, but mostly if a sensitive explanation of the importance of being able to see each other, being able to pick up on cues is given, and acknowledging that it is anxiety provoking, but that you will help them to feel more contained, that usually resolves the situation. And generally, people are much more familiar with these digital platforms and they're more confident. But there are still some people who are quite anxious and unfamiliar, and of course, they will need extra support. And for the practitioner, we've discovered that the type, amount of training and the preparation and the reflection for the facilitator will depend on individuals, but they're all just as important as in the face-to-face delivery. So as I say, some of these, maybe most of them, will not be unfamiliar to you, and a lot of them are sort of quite naturally occurring things. But we started to think about what could be helpful to the facilitator. And of course, I've mentioned the parallel process. More and more, I have conversations with practitioners and other people sort of inquiring about running groups, about the anxiety in the facilitator, quite a natural, reasonable anxiety. And so, of course, because you're pivotal in the delivery, being able to be reflective about that and feeling more contained about your own feelings about delivering is really, really important. And as you know, with containment, it will restore your capacity to think if your anxiety level is reduced. And so it will affect the decisions that you make about running the group and make it clearer about why you're making those decisions. The other thing is that the quality of face-to-face interactions, reading cues, recovering when things go wrong, are key building blocks and are the same for the digital platform as they are in the face-to-face. And again, that time for reflection, supervision, or a discussion with your mentor continues to be really, really important and beneficial. One of the other things that practitioners have asked is, should there be any changes to the content? But actually we found no. Practitioners should just continue to follow the manual. I think it's the wraparound that has some changes and tweaks, but not the actual delivery or the content of the course. One of the recurring conversations that we've had has been about the use of different teaching aids, and there is sometimes that anxiety-driven sort of choice about introducing things that aren't necessarily helpful to the experiential experience. And I probably will mention don't use PowerPoints quite a few times, but somehow the anxiety that is raised in the digital platform delivery has led people to somehow not speak to parents in the virtual environment the way they would in the classroom, and they've put PowerPoints with activities and the instructions for the activities on that, where they wouldn't normally do that in the classroom. There is a whiteboard, and when you're using a flip chart chart in the usual environment, in the face-to-face, you can use the whiteboard in the same sort of way. Or some practitioners have set up a flip chart next to them and actually written on that. The PowerPoint occasionally can be helpful if you've got an image that you would normally show, so there is 1 or 2 images in the antenatal, that it can be helpful just to show the PowerPoint. But if you had one of the display charts that we've created and you could show that, that would be equally as effective if it was nice and clear on the camera. But those are really the only situations where a PowerPoint might be helpful. We've also had lots of feedback and thoughts about delivering the groups and in relation to the practical issues. And I'm sure most of you will have given this thought anyway, setting up secure meetings, the passwords, the waiting room, depending on the type of digital platform you're using. Some you can register people. Teams, for instance, requires participants to have an email because you have to send them an email to join. So these are sometimes things to think about. Not everybody would have an email, although the majority of people do. Again, the Wi-Fi, what devices do people have? Lots of the facilitators have said that parents sometimes only have their phone, and that can have some limited function when people are attending a group. And also, what would you do if there was a disruption to your Wi-Fi? How can you prepare parents to be able to get back in? And that's not dissimilar to you as a practitioner using today's session. And again, when you're setting up the group, how are you going to communicate? There's been a wide range of sort of mediums that people have reported. Some have used a phone, some have used text, some have used email. WhatsApp seems to be quite popular, and occasionally people have also sent letters, but that's much less common now. Now, this slide is really about providing a containing experience for parents, and that's no different in essence to you providing a containing experience in the face-to-face. It's just how you present that looks differently. So some of the things that are different is that you have to sometimes think about the safe space for the parent, help them to think about what they feel comfortable about sharing about their home, or do they have a safe, confidential space to attend the group. And I'm sure most of you have probably already thought about this. And also, how can they communicate with others in their home to be able to agree a safe space without causing friction? The other thing that's come up has been childcare. So sometimes people have children, and what arrangements can they make for the children? And also being aware of young children in particular, who might be in the room, because as we all know, sharing strong feelings and emotions affects everybody. So for some parents, they may not have thought about the young child in the room, and that's something you can help them to do. Before the group, people have described a whole range of different ways they've invited people or prepared people for the group. Sometimes adding a few extras about what to expect in the virtual environment can be helpful, telling them that there will be a waiting room, that they will be muted when they join. How you manage the conversations once they're in the group session, that can be talked about once they've joined, because what people have said is that people need some basic information, but they don't need too much information. And that's sort of standard whether you're running a group in the virtual environment or a face-to-face. And also you may want to invite people to a pre-session to say hello and test the Wi-Fi. Again, that can just be a very short session. It doesn't have to be a long session. It can be a sort of half an hour sort of session where people can just drop in, or you could decide that you'll tell everybody it'll start at a sort of a certain time. But some people have found that quite helpful. I mean, lots of people have been very creative about how they've supported parents. Some have been able to get funding for phone data because, again, that can be difficult. Some have offered sort of music as, in the waiting room. We've had a go at that a little bit. We've got our own Solihull Approach music playlist, which was quite entertaining to do, wasn't it, Hannah? It did really make you think about what sort of stuff do I like and what's important to me. And if you had the know-how, you might think you could ask parents if they'd like to contribute their own playlist. Some people have asked about the pass cards, because obviously that's usually a physical thing that you would suggest that somebody just lays down on a table so that you can sort of pick up that cue. Some people have used the chat feature so that they can communicate that they want to pass. Having said that, the pass card is rarely used, so it's not something that is an issue that becomes very prominent. The other thing that people have thought about is the rhythm of the group. It's no different to the face-to-face. Again, you're thinking about the dance of reciprocity and the rhythm in the overall group as well as your individual interactions. This again can be, the music can be used to help that initiation and orientation. People have got, as I say, got lots of creative ideas, and also building in that understanding about the rhythm of the group. With that, you don't necessarily have to say, oh, this is the rhythm of the group, but, you know, being able to help people to manage their expectations of what is coming up. So again, letting people know that you're muting, letting people know that you may name them, because that again can feel a little bit anxiety provoking if somebody's not expecting you to name them, to be able to identify that they want to speak. Also to let them know that they can use the raised hand, and also that they can unmute themselves or mute themselves. Rupture repair seems to be the component of reciprocity that is probably a little bit more prominent in the virtual environment, and being able to hold that in mind will help you have a framework to be able to respond to the increased number of disruptions that may or may not occur. Again, you know, how you bring people back to repair those disruptions, and acknowledging that they might well be disruptions can sometimes reduce the anxiety about that, and also allow people to feel more confident to voice when there is a disruption with the Wi-Fi, rather than sitting sort of thinking, well, should I say something or not? So you can introduce that again at the beginning of the day in the group rules. And as you say, just revisit it. Let people know that you will be checking in with them more often, so that people don't think that it's because they're quiet, but just that you're going to provide that sort of support to everybody. Some people can feel more quiet, can be more quiet than others, and that may just be their natural place in a group. And again, the description of the face-to-face and the group types hasn't changed, but you can use different techniques to try and draw people out, and sometimes you do need to be a little bit more explicit, but of course there is that sensitivity element to it. I think I've mentioned this before about the activities being described verbally, and also with the camera being active, so that you can judge when people are understanding and picking up your cues. And it's as important for the parent to be able to pick your cues up as it is for them. And people have acknowledged that if they do use the PowerPoint, sometimes it means that the parent will be focusing on the PowerPoint or the facilitator rather than the parents or the facilitator. It has been a really interesting observation that for some reason the virtual platform does feel more exposing when you first start to use it. And when this has been discussed, people have sort of said, well, I think maybe I am using the PowerPoint to protect myself from the uncomfortable feelings of feeling the focus of attention. But on the positive side, that feeling of anxiety does resolve quite quickly. And I can acknowledge that I, you know, like lots of other people, had that initial sort of, oh, I can see myself as well as you, because normally you're just looking out and you're not seeing yourself, and whether your hair's in the right place or your expressions have just frozen on an unfortunate face. So I think it's something that I've included in the presentation because it's one of those underlying sort of issues that once you bring out, more and more people go, well, actually, I think that relates to some thought processes I had. The other issue that people have asked about the disk in the PowerPoint presentation. Some people don't have a disk, a CD driver in their computer. So what we will be doing is putting a link on the web page for the webinar. There is also a how-to guide that you may already have seen on the website about how to run virtual groups. As we gather more information about this, we will continue to share those ideas and those findings with you. But that really just brings this part of the presentation to an end. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Somebody was asking about the music. The other, because YouTube is blocked, but the other thing we've used is Spotify. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that. Hannah might be able to explain what Spotify does.
Yeah, so on the document, the webinar document, there's two links on there. So there's one to YouTube and one to Spotify. Spotify is just a playlist app that you can listen to on your phone, or even you can use a web version of it. So they're both accessible. I'm not sure if that would be blocked too, but you could give that a go.
Sometimes in our trust, what we had to do is we had to contact the IT department, and they had to give you an individual sort of admin permissions, and that they didn't, if they knew there was a justifiable reason for that, then they would give you access to YouTube. But of course, that can be variant on lots of different organisations. I think the other thing was there was a few questions about the PowerPoint, but of course, I think I did repeat that more than once, that we're trying to create the same environment as you would in the face-to-face and steer away from using the PowerPoint as a medium of the virtual environment when it wouldn't necessarily be necessary in the face-to-face. And we're really trying to encourage the experiential experience for both the facilitator and for the parent, so that it is mirroring the face-to-face experience. And there may well be the odd image that could be put up on a PowerPoint, but I think that they would literally be one or two. I'm not sure what else to say about that, because we've been quite reflective about it, and we've gathered lots of sort of reasons as to why the PowerPoint question has come up. So we haven't got any plans to produce any PowerPoints. We've been quite cautious about that, really, I think, because we're very keen not to detract from the experiential experience and that reciprocity that is so fundamental to the interaction. I don't think there were any more themes coming through, were there, Hannah?
Just going through a couple more feedback in the chat now about how well it's been working and the feedback been received.
Yeah, the other thing I would have said, I'd say, is if you do have some feedback, we'd be really keen to hear it. And as we gather that, we'll put it out there so that everybody can share, because it is a new experience, and a lot of it people just haven't tried before. So some of it is a bit of trial and error, and new things are coming up all the time as to what works and what needs a bit more thinking time.
So it was just the issue of the rather delicate issue, it seems to me, of trying to have a conversation with parents about what you do and don't want them to do when they're essentially in their own home. Like, you know, possibly don't be on your phone or don't be smoking,
Yeah.
don't do kind of thing. And I just wondered how you got on with conversations like that.
Well, I mean, we don't run groups ourselves, but we've gathered, you know, sort of information about that. And I think it's exactly the same. My impression is that it's the same challenges that you face in the you know, the room, that there will be some parents that need more sort of support in being able to self-regulate or to have a shift in how they think. And so for some of them, it won't be a one-off conversation, and you may have to say it in lots of different ways. And sometimes it can be a group agreement. So sometimes the power comes from the group. So again, I think it's not a straightforward answer, and it will vary quite a lot. I don't know whether that's what other people have found. There are some, I mean, I think the issue about self-regulation in terms of phones, you know, and just answering the door, or, you know, sort of things like that, is an ongoing issue, really. And yes, it's quite a challenge, and one group may settle down really quickly, and another group there may be many more disruptions before you might be into session 3 before you've gotten a general smooth rhythm to the group. I think yeah, I'm not really giving you the golden answer, but I think that's because there isn't necessarily one.
We've just got another one from Maria.
Oh, okay.
So apart from the playlist, is there anything else that can aid facilitators to deliver this, or must we create our own material?
Well, it depends on what part of the delivery you're talking about. I think some of the things like the playlist has just been a sort of an add-on, because the manual itself gives you how to run it, and the extra bits are just sort of creative, sensitive, thoughtful things that people do in their local environment. So everything is in the manual. And if you want to add on to the manual for that type of thing, we can continue to share those types of ideas with you. We can perhaps, you know, sort of have some conversations in the office as to how we can, you know, build any more ideas that come through, and we can share them with you. But basically everything should be in the manual as to how to run the group. And these are just extras, really.
I haven't run a parenting group yet, but obviously did in the past. But I was thinking about things myself while I was teaching others how to run it, the 10-week one recently. And basically I was listening to the question about Janet's question about the group rules. And we very much, like we did on the training day, that as long as, I think it is one to save on the whiteboard, start it off on the whiteboard week 1, save it in your file, and actually later use it every week, just so that you can build on the ground rules, but show that safe boundaries of ground rules. So just like Mary's saying, it's vital to have the ground rules, just like it says in the sessions, but maybe you have to generate them slowly because they won't know each other so much in week one. But as long as you can put 2 or 3 on a whiteboard and give them the clues, and they can add it to them after. So I know if you're not used to the whiteboard straight away, it's difficult, but that's one way around that one, which I don't know if others have tried. And I was just thinking about, for instance, the play session, and this is people's suggestions and things like that from the groups that they've run online. If you actually, all you want to do is generate the feelings around starting play, stopping play, how it's uncomfortable to be taken out of a certain zone if you're in a zone. And it's ideas like, you can still have things like, as long as you give them the ground, you know, lots of people are used to playing on computers and things, but as long as you give them the ground rules in a breakout rooms for something like I Spy, or anything else you can think of. I went to market used to be my day, or other things, you know, any game you can think of mentally that they could play in their breakout room, and whether you're dividing into 2 in a breakout room and actually one host is in each room, whichever way you do it, you can sort of still get the ideas around stopping play and how it feels for a child if their play is interrupted. So those were just 2 little suggestions that came up in groups recently. That's it really, but I know you're saying generate, I did say to people it's in the pack, but putting it online, I think the first time is always a little bit more, I'm not sure how to deviate slightly, but you don't need to deviate from the material. You just have to think how to do that session, if you know what I mean, for the parents in the best way. And I still always think of that until week 4, they aren't a group properly anyway. So you've just got to, I saw that word engage. So anyway, you can bring sensitivity, humor, keep them there any way you can think of to start off with. And that for me, very much in old groups running, was having a pre-session. And as Mary said, I can't emphasize enough, get them there just to practice the IT to start off with, and then you'll have them, you know, comfortable on the day, and you've started engaging with them from the beginning. That's all I've got to add, Mary. I don't know if there's any questions, but so people have been doing a bit, and I've just been picking up along the way what they've been doing, really.
And I think that's it, Judy. It's following the manual, and then when we talk about being creative, it is about just tweaking that. Some of those activities that don't sit so well in the virtual sort of world, and you know, other games like the I Spy and the other types of things, they can just add to the sort of quality of what you're delivering. So I think that's it. I think it's once you get past that initial worry about it being a virtual and you settle in, most people, I mean, that's what I found that after about session 2 or 3, people are much more comfortable with the virtual, and then they don't have to fill their head with that. And that goes for both the facilitator and the parent. And again, that's about that forming, you know, sort of storming, norming, you know, people just building up their group dynamics and becoming more comfortable with each other. And as you say, there are some groups that lay down their group rules all on session 1, and others that you just have to keep gathering them and revisiting them each time you do a session. And normally you'd put it up, maybe up on the wall every week. Whereas this, if you do save your whiteboard, you can then just present it each time and say, do you want to add to it or not? And again, I didn't mention it so much, but again, the idea of endings, because it's how you bring that session to an end, because sometimes the sort of sudden cut off, normally people go and they wave, and it's sort of mirroring that. And some people have used, I think Hazel's mentioned it in the how-to guide, some people have sort of just had a little bit of music playing as the session starts to come to an end. The other thing is that some other people, what they've done is they've kept the session open. So if anybody wanted to stay on for, you know, they've said, oh, it's open for 10 or 15 minutes after the session. If you'd like to stay, we can go into a breakout room. Others have chosen not to do that. It just depends on how you would run your group usually. And also the other thing sometimes people have done is they've had an agreement as you would normally. You know, if we wanted to phone you, would it be okay to phone? But for the first session, if they felt it was, you know, people were quiet or it felt more unsettled, they may well have sort of said, oh, would you mind if I phone everybody just after the session to see how it's gone for you? So again, it's using the facilitator's judgment, just as you would in the face-to-face, I think, because you will pick up on those cues and you'll be the one that will be building on week by week and getting to know people. And they'll be getting to know you as well. So
there's one about virtual sessions. Are they still 2 hours long?
yeah, it does seem like the timing has remained the same. People can tolerate 2 hours. What they've done is just added those extra breaks in. So there might be, you know, a few minutes, or there might be 5 minutes. The other thing sometimes, as in the trainings that we've been running, some groups, the facilitator has sort of led that, or other time by checking in with the group, or others, they've sort of said to somebody, once you get to know the parents, oh, would somebody like to just remind us when 20 minutes has happened or 30 minutes has happened? And then that gives it, again, a little bit of ownership for the parents participating. And sometimes that's been rotated, or somebody likes to do that job. So again, it can be done in lots of different types of ways, but 2 hours just seem to be tolerable. Obviously, the lead-in, you'll know whether you need to adapt that, whether it needs a little bit extra time to settle people in the early sessions, but generally people start to settle in quite quickly afterwards. And again, there's a standard sort of thing, have you got yourself a drink, that type of thing, so you feel comfortable. I mean, I still am in total admiration of the ones early group that only had a very small group, and they were in a small area, and they did drop off tea, biscuits on the doorstep. I mean, obviously now with the understanding about COVID, I'm not sure you'd be able to do that, but just before it had, the understanding about transmission had been much more sophisticated, that they did do that. So, but that again, that just is an idea about people trying to be thoughtful and creating that sort of sense of sitting down with a cup of tea. But nowadays, I think probably most people would probably not do that as in terms of the physical, but definitely of the checking in with people if they've got their drink and everything. So we've got a couple of minutes. Are there any final observations or questions?
There are a few more in the chat again.
Yeah.
Any emotional outbursts, and you need to support the parents away from the group.
Yeah, and again, I think that if there are situations like that, the facilitator would be thinking about how they would deal with that in that situation. Sometimes they've been able to perhaps use a breakout room. Sometimes they've offered them to stay at the end of the session, or they phone them afterwards. It really does vary. Again, it's one of the situations that you may experience in the face-to-face delivery, and you would need to think about how you deal with each of those individual circumstances depending on the group of parents that you have. So I think that is the same in terms of you recognising what to do in that moment. But there are some features of the virtual sort of platform that does give you an option to do something if you're able to, if the person does agree to do that, or you can contact them after the session. It is quite a delicate one, really, I think.
And then we've also got, people were asking, do we really need to do 10, or can we condense some sessions in term time? And then also, how many in a group online have been suitable?
The number online, I think a lot of people have kept it to below 12. Lots of the research talking about experiential learning does say that the optimum sort of upper limit is about 12. So I think once you have more than that number in a experiential group, it does reduce the discussion time. I know that the antenatal, you may have more, but the design of that group is different to the 10-week parenting group. The 10-week parenting group has been designed over 10 sessions. There's several research papers now tracking the evidence base and exploring how important it is that one session builds on another session. So when you cut out a session or you bring two together, what you're doing is reducing that processing time, or sort of not giving parents the opportunity to be able to move from one session to another with some thought or practice time in between. So we did we did at least 25 pilot sessions before we even got to the final sort of 10 session model, and we had a whole range of different things that people did. Sometimes they shifted them around, sometimes they cut them out, and we did find that when people condensed them, they had to sometimes then spend more time in a follow-up session to cover some of the thinking that would have happened between the sessions or in those sessions. It does feel like it's a simple thing to do, but actually it can have quite it can have a lot of impact on the capacity of the parent to be able to make that journey through the 10 sessions. And we have had people reduce it without letting us know, but then they've said it didn't work. So I think in addition to that, I would say that the model is very well evidence-based. Each session is in a particular order, and all the activities are designed for particular reasons. So we'd really say no, it's not to the parents' benefit to reduce the time, not in terms of what you want as an outcome. If you want an outcome for them to have had an experiential processing period of time, but I do understand the challenges that you have in terms of time frames, but I don't think over the years we've had lots of conversations about reducing it, and we've come to the conclusion that actually it doesn't really work. So I think we'll finish now. Obviously, if you wanted to ask anything afterwards that didn't sort of occur to you, you can always contact the Solihull Approach office and we'll get back to you.